Very good afternoon to the respected dignitaries and the organizing members of the consortium of three colleges: Vijay Lakshmi Vishwanath Dalvi Degree College, Talere; Vishwa Bhushan Bharat Ratna Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar College, Amba Dave; and Keshav Vishnu Pendharkar College, Dombivali; and to the students affiliated to the University of Mumbai. At the outset, my heartfelt thanks to the organizers of the online lecture series, University of Mumbai, to give me a platform and opportunity to be the resource person for this online lecture. I'm going to talk on one of the subject of zoology. This is paper 3, unit 3. Title is Muscles of Long Bones of Human Limbs. And I'm going to give the introductory lecture, that is Introduction and Types of Limb Muscles 3.1. So this unit is having 3 subsections or 3 subunits, of which the first one is Introduction, and the next 3.2 deals with the muscles of the upper limb, whereas 3.3 deals with the muscles of the lower limb. Mine is an introductory lecture regarding the muscles. What I have observed is that the students are slightly skeptical, or they have some reservations with respect to this unit, saying that a lot of names are there, terminologies are there, and it's very difficult to remember the origin and their insertions and all. So this lecture will hopefully help you in understanding the muscles in a better way. So let's start with the very basics: tissue. What do you mean by the word tissue? So tissue, they are the group of cells that have similar structure and perform specific or similar function. There are different types of tissue, of which muscle is a tissue. Now let us see the basics of this muscle tissue. So what is the shape or size of the muscle? So they are highly thin, specialized thin and elongated cells. So they are not round shaped cells as we are normal acquainted to see. So these are elongated cells, thin in nature, and therefore instead of calling as cell, they are called as muscle fibers. Now there are certain terminologies with respect to muscle tissue, muscle cells. Say for example, the cytoplasm in a cell is called as sarcoplasm in the muscle fiber. Endoplasmic reticulum here is called as the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The plasma membrane in case of the cell, here it is called as sarcolemma. And within the cell of within the muscle fibers, there are presence of protein fibers which are called as myofibrils. Now, what are the basic properties of the muscle tissue? So the 4 basic properties are that it exhibits contractibility, excitability, extensibility, and elasticity. Let us try to understand first. Contractibility means the muscle fiber has the ability to contract, means from its normal size, it can become a shorter in nature. Excitability means here, when this muscle tissue is given excitation or stimulus, it gives the response. So that property is called as excitability. Extensibility means here the muscle fiber can be stretched from its normal size. And the last one, that is the elasticity. Elasticity means though it can contract or it can be stretched, it has the ability to bounce back to its normal size, and that means elasticity. Now there are different types of muscles within the body, that is the skeletal muscles, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. At this juncture, I would like to say that whatever we are talking here is with respect to the human beings. And I hope you're able to understand whatever I said. Now, as it is said, skeletal muscles, they are attached to the bones, whereas the cardiac muscle, as the name suggests, This type of muscle is exclusively present in the heart. It is said to be the most hardest muscle. And the third one, that is the smooth muscles, which are generally present in the visceral organs. We will concentrate only on the skeletal muscles because we are going to study about the muscles of the long limbs. So we are concerned with the skeletal muscles instead of smooth muscle and the cardiac muscles. Skeletal muscles, they are also called as striated muscles, as well as they are called as the voluntary muscle. Why it is called as striated muscles? Because if you observe it under microscope, you see the presence of striations, light and dark bands. And therefore, the skeletal muscle is called as the striated muscles. Voluntary muscle, because the movement of this muscle is on our own will. If I want to move, I can move. With the help of these muscles, I can do the movement. Okay. Therefore, it is called as the voluntary muscles. This cannot be applied for the cardiac muscle or the smooth muscles. Say for example, smooth muscles in alimentary canal, they exhibit peristaltic movements. So we don't say that, come on, now start the peristaltic movements. Or we don't give the command to the heart, start pumping the heartbeat. But with respect to the skeletal muscles, obviously with the help of these muscles, we can do the movements or the locomotion. Now, obviously the skeletal muscle, it is composed of muscle fibers. As said earlier, it is long, cylindrical, and each fiber or each cell consists of many or multiple nuclei. Now, each fiber has many myofibrils. They may be of thick nature or they may be of thin nature. These myofibrils, they are protein in nature, chemical composition. And the thick myofibrils, they are called as myosin, whereas the thin myofibrils, they are called as actin. So collectively, they are called as the myofilaments, thick as well as thin. Now, with respect to function, they bring, as said earlier, they bring about the voluntary movement of the organs and locomotion of the body. So if I say hi to you with non-verbally, so I'm moving my hand, I'm speaking to you. So that is a movement of my muscles of the mouth or the face. Whereas locomotion means when we move from one part to place to another place, that is locomotion. And in this case, the example you can say walking, running, or climbing, all this example come under the locomotion of the body. So in case of the skeletal muscles, the contractions which they exhibit is very rapid and powerful, and therefore within a short duration, the person gets fatigued, and therefore we cannot continue exercise for a longer duration. If we continue exercise for longer duration, your muscles get fatigued and you say there is pain in the muscles. Now regarding the nervous control, it is controlled by peripheral nervous system as well as the central nervous system. Location, any part of the body associated with the bones, those muscles are the skeletal muscles. Structure of a skeletal muscle. This is a structure. You can see this is a bone. And the muscle is generally attached. This is a muscle. The red color one is a muscle. And muscles are generally attached, not always, attached to the bone by means of thick, dense, non-elastic fibrous tissue, connective fibrous tissue, which is called as the tendon. Okay, it is represented by white color. Sometimes instead of tendon, it is aponeurosis. You may come across a word called a terminology which is called as aponeurosis. So aponeurosis and tendon, their function is same, that they help in connecting the muscle with the bone. But the only difference is the tendon is dense, thick in nature, whereas the aponeurosis is flat and thin in nature, and it is more whitish as compared to the tendons. Now, if you see the cross section of the muscle, The outer covering of this muscle is called as epimysium. Within each muscle, you can see many bundles. Each bundle is called as fascicle. The covering of this fascicle is called as perimysium. And within each fascicle, there is presence of the muscle fibers. And the covering of this muscle fiber, it is a connective tissue, membranous connective tissue, and this covering is called as endomysium. Okay, so three-stage covering. One is the epimysium. Inside there is presence of bundles of muscle fiber. Each bundle is called as fascicle, and each fascicle is covered by means of perimysium. And within each fascicle, there is presence of muscle fiber, numerous muscle fiber, and each muscle fiber is having the covering, which is called as the endomysium. So this is the basic uh, structure of the muscle, skeletal muscle. Now this is something how the muscles are present throughout the body. The diagram or the representation is of a human being, and it is a lateral view, and you can see lot of muscles throughout the body. And when the muscles term comes, we always think that it is about the people who think about building the muscles, bodybuilders. But muscles, it is very much important for everyone. And if it is obesity, the muscles are more, instead of muscles, it is more of fat. And if you are fit and fine, obviously the muscle part is more and the fat part is within the normal range. Now, whenever you want to be fit and fine, we have to work on muscles. And generally people, what they do, they go to gym or do another form of exercise, like they go for either yoga or they get indulged into different activities or sport activities. So in that way, the people try to make themselves fit and the body become muscular more and fat deposition becomes less. Now, there are certain interesting facts which I would like to share with my students. The longest muscle in the entire body is sartorius, which is present in the thigh region. And the shortest muscle is stapedius. It is present in the internal ear. Largest muscle is gluteus maximum, which is at the buttock region, whereas the strongest muscle, it is slightly controversial. Some say that it is the tongue, some say that it is a masseter. Masseter muscles, they are present near the jaw region, which help in the chewing of the food. It is said that the muscle mass in humans is 35 to 40% of the total body weight. So muscle forms a substantial part of a human body weight. It is said that if you don't do exercise, slight amount of muscle mass is lost. Whereas if you do exercise, we gain the muscle mass. Now, taking cue from the T.Y.B.Sc and from the zoology textbook, there is a learner space for my students. And as I'm dealing more with the muscles of the long limbs, I have questions for my students that they should explore other aspects of the muscles present in the entire body. So learner space for the students is how many muscles are there in human body? You have to find out. Second, do males and females have same number of muscles? Do males and females have the same muscle mass? And find out the information regarding which is the most busiest and the hardest muscle in the body. I think so for the hardest muscle already I have said. Now, let's start with the muscles of the long limb. And the introduction and the types actually uh, here in your syllabus only introduction part, but we are more concerned with the types of muscles based on the muscular movements. But for us it is very much essential to know what is the plane, different planes of the body, what are the anatomical directions, what do you mean by muscular movement, different types of muscular movements, and the types of muscles which bring about these muscular movements. Okay. Unless and until you know about the planes of the body, anatomical directions, clearly you won't be able to understand the different types of muscular movements. And then obviously understanding different type of muscle will become more challenging. So let's start from the very basics, that is the planes of the body. Planes means these are the imaginary lines or imaginary plane. So within body there are three basic plane. One is the transverse plane, another one is the frontal plane, and the third one is the sagittal plane. Frontal plane is also called as coronal plane, whereas transverse plane is also called as the axial plane. Now let us start with the first one, the transverse plane. Okay. So it is an imaginary plane which divides, and this plane goes from one side to another side, that is from left to right or right to left, and it goes from front to back. This plane has two dimensions. One is from front to back, and another dimension is from one side to another side, that is from right to left or left to right. So this transverse imaginary plane divides the body into two parts, the upper part and the lower part. The upper part is called as the superior or cranial part, whereas the lower part is called as inferior or the caudal part. Okay, so this transverse plane divides the body into superior and inferior. Now the next one is the frontal plane. In case of frontal plane, see how it is moving, it is passing. This frontal plane, the two dimensions are from one side to another side, that is from right to left or left to right, and it is from up to down or down to up. So these are the two dimensions for the frontal plane. This frontal plane is also called as the coronal plane. This coronal plane divides the body into anterior or ventral side and posterior or the dorsal side. So the face part of this person is the ventral or the anterior part, whereas the back part of this person, this lady, is the dorsal or the posterior part or posterior side of the body. Let's come to the third one, and that is a sagittal plane. Sagittal plane, let's see its dimension, two dimension. One is from front to back or back to front, and the another dimension is from top to bottom or up to down and down to up. Okay, so these are the two dimensions of the sagittal plane. And this sagittal plane, if it is passing through the midline of the body, then it is called as the median plane. Now this sagittal plane divides the body into two parts, the right part and the left part. Okay, of this individual, this is the right part and this is the left part of this individual. Okay, whereas for when we are facing to our screen, this part is right and this part is left. But for this person, this part is right and this part is left. So Once again summarize. So transverse plane divides the body into superior and inferior part of the body, whereas frontal plane or the coronal plane divides the body into anterior or ventral side and dorsal or posterior side, whereas the sagittal plane, it divides the body into right and left. Now let us see about the anatomical directions. Okay, these are the anatomical directions, that is a superior or cranial, which you are familiar, inferior or caudal, anterior or ventral, posterior or dorsal, medial, lateral, proximal and distal. Let us see with the help of this photographs. So the photograph A, this girl, the front, this is a front view, this is the anterior part of the body, whereas in C, this is the posterior part of the body or the posterior side of the body, also called as the dorsal side of the body, whereas this is the A photograph is the anterior side or the ventral side of the body, whereas the B, this is the lateral side of the body. Okay. The superior part, this is the superior part, which is also called as the cranial. This is the inferior part, which is also called as the caudal. Now, within the body, as we are dealing with the medial part, means this middle part of the body is the medial. Imaginary axis passing from here, this is the medial part of the body. Whereas this part, the limbs, they form the lateral part of the body. So this is a lateral and this is the medial. Now let us come to the next part, that is the proximal and distal. Proximal, say for example, let's take the upper arm. Okay, this part, humerus bone. Humerus bone is attached to the shoulder bone, that is a pectoral girdle. And the part of this humerus bone or the upper arm which is attached to the shoulder, that part is called as the proximal part. And the part of the upper arm or the humerus bone which is away from this point of attachment is called as the distal part. So generally for proximal part of the body is that part which is attached to another entity or which is near to the trunk region. That part is called as a proximal part. Whereas distal part is that part of the body which is away from the point of attachment or away from the trunk. That part is called as the distal. So with this unit, you are going to come across these terms now and then. So you should be familiarized with all these terminologies, anatomical terminologies or directions. So while learning these muscles, your understanding will be much better. Now we are, as we are dealing with the long limb muscles, we should have an understanding with the anatomical directions with reference to the upper limb and the lower limb. In the upper limb, this is the superior part, this is the inferior part. Then this part, this margin is the lateral, whereas this part of the upper limb, this margin is said to be as the medial. Medial because it is near to the medial axis. Therefore, this part is the medial and this is the lateral. At this juncture, I would like to say that the forearm has two bones, radius and ulna. So the radius bone is present on this side, whereas ulna bone is present on the medial side. Always remember that the radius, towards the radius side, there is presence of the thumb, whereas towards the ulna side of the forearm, there is presence of the pinky finger or the little finger. Whereas in case of the lower limb, it is exactly opposite. This is the medial side of the lower limb, whereas this is the lateral side of the lower limb. But towards the lateral side, you can see the little toe is present, whereas towards the medial side, there is presence of the big toe. Okay. See here, in case of the upper limb, it is the thumb or is present on the lateral side, whereas in case of the lower limb, the big toe is present on the medial side, and vice versa for the little finger. Here in this shank region, remember, there is again here there is presence of two bones. One is the tibia and another one is fibula. The fibula is present on the lateral side, whereas tibia is present on the medial side. Okay, so tibia, and on this side there is presence of the fibula. This I am saying because whenever we are talking with the muscles, skeletal muscles, as they are called as skeletal muscles, means they are attached to the bones. So orientation of the bones also you should be familiar. So hope you have understood with the lateral and medial part of the upper limb as well as the lower limb. Now remember this part, the middle part, this part. This part is the anterior compartment and the back part of this is the posterior compartment. So this part, always any muscle, generally in case of upper limb, the flexor muscles are present on the anterior compartment and the extensors are present on the posterior compartment. So this part is the anterior compartment and the back of this part is the posterior compartment. Here also this is the anterior compartment and back of this is the posterior compartment. Now let us try to understand muscular movements. So any muscular movement involve anatomical structures. Apart from the anatomical structures, it may be one or more than one anatomical structures. Apart from this, it consists of fixed axis, which is also called as fulcrum, and the direction in which the movement takes place. This direction involves either the sagittal plane or the coronal plane, or it may be the transverse plane. Now let us see the different types of the muscular movements. In your syllabus, the muscular movements that is more concentrated on, it is a flexion and extension, rotation, which is either medial or it is lateral, abduction and adduction. Apart from this, you will come across other type of movements also, like supination, pronation, inversion, eversion, dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. Apart from these type of movements which are associated with the muscles of the long limb, there are other types of movements too, like elevation and depression, apposition and reposition, protraction and retraction, circumduction. But are these only the type of movements? Can there be other type of movements also? So there is, for the takeaway for the students, that find out the information regarding the movements of the following anatomical structures, like the eye movements, or the what is the eye movements called as, or the movements which involves the jaw and the teeth. Find out the information regarding this. Now let's start with the different types of movements, and the first one is the flexion and extension. These are two different movements and they are opposition to each other, means their movement is exactly opposite to each other. The direction involved is sagittal plane. If you remember, sagittal plane means from top to bottom or bottom to up and front to back. Okay. So this is a direction for the flexion and the extension movement. And generally the axis is the it is around the transverse axis. The movement takes place around the transverse axis. So let's start. What do you mean by the flexion? Flexion means bending of the joint. So here the photograph is of a girl who is whose hand, this is the elbow joint, and you can see this forearm and the upper arm, they have come close to each other. So the angle between the uh, elbow joint is very less, and this type of movement is called as the flexion, because the bending of the elbow joint has taken place. So flexion involves decreasing the angle between the two entities taking part in the movement. That may be muscle, bones, or any part, any other body part. Whereas extension, which is exactly opposite to that of the flexion. So here, if flexion is bringing about the bending of the joint, extension will bring about straightening of the joint. So here you can see the bending of the joint was taken place because of the flexion at the elbow joint. Here you can see the elbow joint, the angle has increased. The joint has been straightened up. So this movement from here, when this girl brings her hand to this position, that movement is called as extension. When from this movement, or from this position, straight position of her hand, if she bring this forearm to the shoulder in this way, okay, this is brought here, then that movement is called as flexion. So from here to here, like this, it is called as flexion. Whereas from this position to this position, when the palm comes from the shoulder position to the thigh region, here as it is shown, it is called as the extension. So these movements takes place at the shoulder joint, hip joint, elbow, knee, wrist, metacarpophalangeal joint or metatarsophalangeal joint, and interphalangeal joints. Hope you are aware about metacarpophalangeal joints. Metacarpophalangeal joints means metacarpals. Okay, metacarpals, the bones of the palm region. They are called as the metacarpals. So metacarpals and the finger part, the bones present in the fingers, they are called as the phalanx or phalanges together. So the joint between the metacarpal and the first phalanx is called as the metacarpophalangeal joint. The metatarsophalangeal joint is with respect to the foot, same position. Interphalangeal joints means within the finger there are presence of, except for thumb or big toe, in case of the other fingers, it consists of three phalanx. So the joint between two phalanx is called as the interphalangeal joint. This here, the photograph, this was the flexion which has taken place at the elbow joint and extension at the elbow joint. Here, the flexion and extension is at the shoulder joint. So this is the movement from this position, from straight position where the palm is touching to the thigh. From this position, when the hand is brought to upper to the shoulder region, this movement is called as a flexion. From this position itself, when the hand is moved towards the back side, then it is called as the extension. So this is the extension at the shoulder joint. This is the flexion at the shoulder joint. Next is the abduction and adduction. Abduction, from this, ab means away, away from the medial axis, whereas adduction means coming, bringing back to the medial axis or to the median plane. So here let us see again here, abduction and adduction, they both are opposing movements, where abduction brings or takes the extremities away from the body. The adduction brings the extremities close to the body. So here the direction is frontal plane. The axis is the antero-posterior axis. Frontal plane means it is from down up to top to bottom, or bottom to up, or it is one side to another side. And these movements are in relation to the median plane. So this is the median plane. With relation to this median plane, the movement is there. Now during abduction, the extremities, that is the upper limb or the lower limb, is taken away from the median axis. So this is the median axis or median plane. So is median plane say the extremities, that is the lower limb or the upper limb, is taken away. Whereas in case of adduction, the extremities like the upper limb and the lower limb, which is present away from the median plane of the body, they are brought near. So when the hand from this position is moving to this position, as it is seen here, and the leg which is moving, which is away from the median axis, when it moves from this direction to this direction, it moves towards the median axis, then that is called as the adduction. So this is the adduction, adducted position. This is the abducted position. So adduction, when this individual spreads its hands and legs, then it is a abduction. When these spreaded hands and legs, they are brought close to the body or to the median axis, then that process is called as the adduction. Now this movement takes place at the shoulder region, hip, wrist, or metacarpophalangeal and metatarsophalangeal joints. Now the third type of movement, that is a rotation. This rotation is of two types, lateral rotation and the another one is medial rotation. Lateral rotation and medial rotation are opposite to each other. Again, this movement is with reference to the median plane. In case of the adduction and abduction, the direction was with reference to the frontal plane, whereas in case of the rotation, the direction is with reference to the transverse plane. Okay. When we talk about transverse plane, the dimensions are side to side or front to back. The axis here is the longitudinal axis. And as I had said earlier, it is relative to the median plane. So this is the longitudinal axis. This is the transverse plane, which shows the where the movement is seen, and this is the median plane. So this movement, this movement is medial rotation, because this forearm, with reference to the this upper arm, it has moved towards the median plane. Whereas in case of the second photograph, this forearm from the median plane, which was earlier close to the median plane, has moved away from the median plane. It is towards the lateral side, and therefore this type of rotation is called as the lateral rotation. Okay, so when you bring the body part close to the median axis, then this type of rotation is called as the medial rotation. When you move the body part away from the median plane along the transverse direction, then this type of movement is called as the lateral rotation. Hope you are clear with the three types of movements, three groups of movements. The first one was flexion and extension, where it involved sagittal plane, abduction and adduction, it involved frontal plane, whereas the rotation involved the transverse plane. So these three group of movements has involved three types of planes. Apart from this, you are going to come across different types of uh, movements with reference to the limbs. So I'm just showing the photographs of it so that you will understand. You will come across what is called as pronation and supination. Pronation and supination comes from the word prone position and supine position. Prone position means face down and supine position means face up. So here with reference to hand, this is the palm region which is facing down. So this position is called as prone position. And in the second photograph, that is photograph B, the palm region is facing up to the sky. So this type of position is called as the supine position. When from supine position, you move to prone position, that movement is called as pronation. Whereas when you move from the prone position to the supine position, that process, that movement is called as supination. Here, in this photograph, the two palms are there, what do you say? A hand part is there or the palm part is there. Here you can see the palm part is present towards the anterior part, anterior side, whereas here the palm region is present towards the posterior side. This position is the prone position, whereas this position is the supine position. Okay, so from this movement, this position, when you move to this type of position, it is called as supination. And from this position of the palm, if you move to this type, this direction, then it is called as the pronation. Now there is something called as dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. So for that, let us try to understand this foot region. As I have said earlier, this is the anterior part, which is also called as the ventral. And earlier I had shown you this part, which is the posterior view or posterior side or the dorsal side. But in the foot region, this part, the upper part which you see from your eyes, this part is called as dorsum, whereas the sole part which is facing towards the ground, that part is called as a plantar. So the foot upper part is called as a dorsum and the lower part which faces to the ground is called as plantar. So based on this, the flexion at the ankle joint, where the big toe faces upward direction, you can see here, this is the foot which is present in the normal position at the ankle joint. But when this joint angle is lowered, or the bending of this joint is there, where you can see the angle is reduced and the big toe is facing towards the upward direction. So this type of movement is called as, from here to here, this type of movement is called as dorsiflexion. Whereas from this position, when the movement is towards the lower direction, when the big toe is facing towards the lower side, then it is called as plantar flexion. Here, the question arises, uh, opposite of flexion is extension. So when it is dorsiflexion, so it should be called as plantar extension. Why it is called as plantar flexion? Here, dorsiflexion it is said because this angle is reduced. Whereas in case of plantar flexion, the angle between the heel and this plantar part is reduced. Okay. So here this angle is more, whereas this angle is less. And therefore, instead of calling it as a plantar extension, it is called as plantar flexion. So hope you have understood with the dorsiflexion as well as plantar flexion. Now this is for you to identify which kind of movement it is. Imagine your hand which is facing downward. The palm, the thumb is facing towards the thumb is towards the lateral side, and the little finger or the pinky finger is towards the medial side. So which kind of movement is exhibited by A? Okay, here in this case, this is the normal position. In this case, the hand across from this axis at the wrist position, this thumb is moving, or this hand part is moving away from the medial axis. Whereas in this case, it is moving close to the medial axis. So you have to identify which type of movement this hand is exhibiting. Another, this one, this is a wrist position. You can see this is a normal position of the hand. In this case, in the first case, this angle is reduced, that is between the bones of the forearm and the metacarpals or the wrist. And here, this angle has been increased. So which kind of movement is exhibited by this in this diagram? That you have to identify. Now here, this is a fist. You have to identify which kind of movement is exhibited by the metacarpals, which are present here. These are the phalanges, phalanx here, here, and here. So here you can see at this position, the angle is reduced. At this position also, between two phalanx, the angle is reduced. The angle between the phalanx and the metacarpal, this is also reduced. So this is reduced. Here also the joint angle is reduced. Here also the joint angle is reduced. So you can identify which type of movement is exhibited when you make a fist. Based on the movement of the muscles which we have got familiar with, accordingly there are muscles. Flexor muscles which bring about flexion, extensors are the muscles which brings about extension movement, rotators are the muscles which brings about the rotation, either the lateral rotation or the medial rotation. Abductors are the muscles which brings about abduction movement, whereas adductors are the muscles which brings about the adduction movement. So it's very easy or simple to answer this. So let's start with the flexors and the extensors. As I had said earlier, flexors are the muscles which brings about flexion. Extensors are the muscles which brings about extension. Here I have taken the examples of the upper limb and lower limb, which is there with reference to your syllabus. So upper limb flexor muscles are biceps brachii, brachioradialis, brachialis, flexor carpi ulnaris, flexor carpi radialis. And the one which is shown with the purple color. So here, biceps brachii, it brings about flexion at the shoulder joint as well as elbow joint. Brachioradialis, it brings about the flexion at the elbow joint. Brachialis also brings about the flexion at the elbow joint. Flexor carpi ulnaris. Here the muscle is shouting in saying that my function is flexion. Flexor carpi ulnaris. Here the flexion is takes place at the position of wrist. It's the same for the another muscle, that is the flexor carpi radialis. The same is for the lower limb, sartorius. It brings about flexion at the hip joint as well as at the knee joint. Rectus femoris, it brings about the flexion at the hip joint. Semitendinosus and semimembranosus. These muscles bring about the flexion at the knee joint. Biceps femoris also brings about the flexion at the knee joint. Whereas extensor muscles, upper limb, triceps brachii, which brings about extension at the shoulder and elbow joint, extensor carpi ulnaris at the wrist position. Then you have extensor carpi radialis, which is of two types. One is longus and another one is brevis. Both brings about extension of the wrist at the wrist position. Extensor digitorum communis, it brings about extension at the interphalangeal joints as well as at the metacarpophalangeal joints. Whereas with reference to the lower limb, quadriceps, semitendinosus, here you can see semitendinosus at knee joint, it brings about flexion. Even semimembranosus at knee joint, it brings about flexion, but whereas with reference to hip joint, it brings about extension. So the same muscle at one position, it can act as a flexor muscle. At another position or at another joint, it can act as an extensor muscle. Here biceps femoris also the same thing. Biceps femoris also brings about the extension of the hip joint, at the hip joint. Now at this juncture, I would like to just tell you about the muscles. Here, when you see the words like biceps, triceps, so here the muscles name are given with reference to their head. Biceps means two head, triceps means three head. Brachii means the upper arm, carpi means the forearm. Ulnaris means this muscle is present towards the ulna bone. Radialis means this muscle is present towards the radius bone. Longus means this muscle is very long in nature. Brevis means this muscle is short in nature. Communis means this muscle is very common. So there are uh, there are certain terms in the muscles from the name of the muscles. Many aspects you can write down about that particular muscle. Say for example, if it is extensor carpi radialis longus. So this muscle, as it is written as longus, means this muscle is long. Its function is extensor, means it brings about extension. As this is an extensor of the upper limb, means this muscle is present in the posterior compartment. This muscle is present where? So it is present in the forearm. And in the forearm, where it is present, whether it is present towards the ulna side of the bone or towards the radius side of the bone. So we can write down here that this muscle is present towards the radius side of the bone. So you should take the cue from the name of the muscles. It's very easy. Many points you can write from that only. Let's come to the next one, that is the abductors and the adductors. As the name suggests, abductors are the muscles which bring about abduction, whereas adductors are the muscles which brings about adductions. In the upper limb, the few muscles which brings about abduction are long head of biceps brachii. You can see here the biceps brachii, the long head. It brings about the abduction, whereas the short head of the biceps brachii, it brings about adduction. The same muscle, but its one head is concerned with the abduction, whereas the another head is concerned with the adduction. Then you have flexor carpi radialis, extensor carpi radialis. They bring about adduction of the wrist. With respect to lower limb, sartorius brings about it is a strong, it brings about abduction. Whereas in case of the lower limb adductor, uh, five group of muscles are there, and this adductor group, it brings about adduction at the hip joint. These muscles are present towards the medial side of the thigh region. Now let us see the rotators. Rotators are the muscles which bring about rotation. It may be medial rotation or lateral rotation. Medial rotation is also called as the internal rotation or inward rotation, whereas lateral rotation is also called as the external rotation or outward rotation. So these are some of the examples, like long head of biceps brachii, it brings about medial rotation. Sartorius, it brings about external rotation at the hip joint, whereas internal rotation at the knee joint. And the adductor group, it brings about internal as well as external rotation. Generally, it is adductor magnus, adductor longus, adductor brevis, and gracilis muscle. These muscles are involved with the rotation at the hip joint. Now, for you to explore more, explore the pronator and supinator muscles of the long limbs. Okay. Also, you explore the following muscles like flexor, extensor, adductor, abductor, rotators, not only of the long limbs but in other part of the body. So let's see how much you are able to explore the things. So in my entire lecture, the takeaway points are, we have gone through the different planes of the body. Those are the sagittal, transverse, and the frontal planes. The anatomical directions that you have come across are the anterior, posterior, superior, inferior, medial, lateral, proximal, and distal. The muscular movements that you have studied in detail, they are flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, and rotation. And the muscles which bring about this type of movements are the flexors, extensors, abductors, adductors, and rotators. Uh, After 3.1, the other two subunit of this unit, the second unit, which deals with the different muscles of the upper limb, and the subunit 3, which deals with the muscles of the lower limb. You have to study each muscle in detail, and students may find it confusing or challenging. So here there are some tips from my side. First of all, don't get scared or don't run away from this unit. Don't keep in option. Uh, Instead of that, have a positive approach. Say, yes, I can do it. I will study it. Before studying the muscles, you should get familiar with the anatomical structures of the different bones of the long limbs. So you have the humerus pectoral girdle, then you have humerus, radius, ulna, carpals, metacarpals, and the phalanges. Whereas in the lower limbs, it is the pelvic girdle, femur, tibia, fibula, tarsals, metatarsals, and the phalanges. So there, each and every part you have to be familiar with. And luckily, you have another unit in this paper, and that unit is osteology. So you can first study osteology very nicely, and then this studying the muscles will be very, very much easy for you. Once you are familiar with the different bones, you should also familiarize with the different anatomical directions, which I have already delivered in this lecture. Also, you should, regarding each and every muscle, I have already given you the example that you have to take the cue from the name of the muscles. The muscle's name itself will suggest some points. Its function or its position or its insertion part, or where it is present. This these small points you can get from the name of the muscles itself. Now we are all moved to the online mode, so there are many videos associated with the understanding different types of muscles, and these online videos are available. Especially my suggestion is go through the videos made by kenhub, and another YouTube videos are there by Dr. Nabil Ibrahim. These are very good videos, and this will help you in understanding these muscles in a better way. So if you have any difficulty, you can ask. And thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Uh, Ma'am, from